Thank you for joining us for this episode of Into the Killing. If you have a case you'd like us to cover, please visit our website at kremlinlisted.com. You can also suggest stories for our YouTube channels, which are usually listed under Criminally Listed. As we closed out 2022, we decided to present a special two-part series about one of America's most notorious serial killers, BTK. BTK's reign of terror began in early 1974, a time marked by global energy crises. During this period, several countries implemented measures to conserve power. In the United States, daylight savings time was advanced by 4 months starting January 6th. Britain adopted a 3-day work week, and the Netherlands rationed gasoline, all within the same week. On January 8th, Super Bowl VIII took place at Rice Stadium in Houston, Texas. The Miami Dolphins defeated the Minnesota Vikings 24-7, securing their second consecutive Super Bowl victory. This achievement marked only the second time in history, after the Green Bay Packers in the first 2 Super Bowls, that a team had won back-to-back titles with a 13-1 record. At that time, the top song was Show and Tell by Al Wilson, and the leading film was the horror classic The Exorcist. The day after the Super Bowl, the Otero family from Wichita, Kansas was preparing for their day. Joseph, aged 38, and Julie, 33, had 4 children. Charlie, 15, Danny, 14, Carmen, 13, Josephine, 11, and Joseph Jr., 9, who was called Joey. Joseph had served 20 years in the Air Force, working as a mechanic and flight instructor at Cookier Field, while Julie was employed at the Coleman factory. That morning, Joseph dropped off Charlie at school, then took Danny and Carmen to theirs. Usually, he would have gone to work afterward, but he was injured and stayed home that day. When he returned, Julie was with their younger children, preparing for school. Later that afternoon, Danny and Carmen arrived home from school to a horrifying scene. Their parents' bodies were discovered in the master bedroom. Julie's body lay on the bed, with a rope tied around her neck, while Joseph's body was on the floor, a pillowcase and plastic bag over his head, with a belt wrapped around his neck. Their hands had been bound behind their backs with Venetian blind cords. Danny and Carmen tried to cut the ropes and belt, but were unsuccessful. They also attempted to call the police, only to find the phone line dead. When Charlie arrived home, Danny and Carmen told him their parents were joking around. However, Charlie entered the bedroom and immediately knew his parents were dead. He cut the belt and rope, then tried to call Dievitsatadinitsit, but the line was still out of service. Frightened, he went outside and found a neighbor, who entered the house, saw the bodies, and advised the children to come to his home for safety. Following a neighbor's call, police arrived within minutes and entered the house. In one of the bedrooms, they discovered the lifeless body of 9-year-old Joey, who was covered by a pillowcase and strangled with Venetian blind cords and a plastic bag over his head. As officers continued their search, they uncovered a second horrific scene in the basement. The body of 9-year-old Josephine Otero, hanging from a rope tied to a ceiling pipe. Forensic experts found semen on the floor around her body and on her, yet she had not been sexually assaulted. Authorities concluded that while Josephine was hanging, the killer watched her and masturbated, suggesting a disturbing combination of voyeurism and violence. The medical examiner later determined that all victims had been repeatedly choked into unconsciousness and then revived multiple times, indicating prolonged torture. Louise discovered that the house's phone lines had been cut, and there were no signs of forced entry. Police believed the intruder or intruders entered through the unlocked back door. They suspected that more than one person might have been involved, as controlling all 4 victims alone would have been exceedingly difficult. The crime scene hinted at the work of 2 perpetrators. One had rifled through belongings and stolen items, possibly during a burglary, which could explain the repeated choking. Victims were tortured into revealing the location of valuables. The basement assault, involving Josephine, suggested a second attacker had taken her there while the rest of the family was being tortured upstairs. However, witnesses reported seeing only a single man leaving the Otero residence, and one of the family's cars was stolen, with only one man seen driving it. Despite following multiple leads, authorities could not identify the killer or killers of the Otero family. The case remained unresolved, shrouded in mystery and horror. In early April of 1974, 2 men strolled past the home of 21-year-old Kathy Bright in Wichita. Kathy lived alone, and that afternoon she was working at Coleman. As they walked, the men encountered a man with a bloodied face, Kathy's 19-year-old brother, Kevin Bright. Kevin claimed he had been shot and warned that his sister was being assaulted inside her house. One of the men quickly contacted the police, while the other drove Kevin to the hospital. It was later confirmed that Kevin had been shot twice with a .22 caliber pistol, once in the forehead and once in the upper lip. When officers arrived at Kathy's residence, they found her lying on the floor, bleeding and barely conscious. She was tightly bound with a cord around her neck, indicating she had been strangled to the point of a broken larynx. She had also been stabbed 3 times in the abdomen and 8 times on her back. She was rushed to the same hospital as her brother, but succumbed to her injuries an hour later. During his hospital stay, Kevin recounted that he and Kathy had entered her home and encountered an unfamiliar man wielding a .22 caliber handgun and another gun in a shoulder holster. The intruder claimed he was from California, having recently won money, food, and clothes, and insisted he meant no harm. He led Kevin and Kathy into the bedroom, where he rearranged some of Kathy's clothes, then tied Kevin to a bedpost and Kathy to a chair. The man then returned to Kevin, who was still tied up, and began strangling him. Kevin fought back, managing to free his hands, but the attacker pulled out his gun and shot Kevin in the forehead. Afterward, the intruder returned to Kathy, ensuring she could free herself, then went back to Kevin's room to verify he was dead. Kevin was still alive but unconscious. He tried to grab the man's second gun, leading to a struggle. The attacker shot Kevin again, this time just below the nose. Kevin managed to escape outside, where he found the 2 men who then took him to the hospital. He spent 2 weeks recovering before being released. Investigations revealed that the killer had entered Kathy's home through the back door, breaking a screen and smashing a glass panel on a second door. He also cut the phone lines to prevent communication. Authorities suspected that the same individual responsible for the Otero murders might have committed Kathy's killing, given the similarities. Both attacks occurred inside the victims' homes. The phone lines were cut, and the intruder entered through the back door. The killer used a firearm to manipulate his victims, often luring them with threats or coercion. When he confronted Kathy and Kevin, he typically left to carry out his orders, but the nature of his crimes varied significantly. Kathy was stabbed, her brother shot, while the Otero family members were strangled or suffocated. Tragically, no arrests were ever made in Kathy's murder. In October of 1974, law enforcement believed they had a breakthrough. They detained a teenage boy accused of molesting a 5-year-old child, who also had a history of mental health issues. During questioning about the Otero murders, he confessed and named 2 accomplices, his brother and cousin. At that time, his brother was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility following a suicide attempt. Consequently, all 3 were arrested for the murders of the Otero family members. On the 17th of October, 1974, a local newspaper, the Wichita Eagle, published a story about the arrests. 5 days later, a mysterious caller contacted a columnist from the same paper, instructing him to visit the Wichita Public Library on Main Street. The caller directed him to a specific book, Applied Engineering Mechanics, claiming that a letter inside would reveal proof that the 3 men in custody were innocent of the Otero murders. The columnist and police found the letter as instructed, though it has never been made public. The following is a verbatim transcription of that letter, with any mispronunciations or grammatical errors preserved for accuracy. I write this letter for the sake of the taxpayer and your time. Those 3 men you hold are merely seeking publicity for the Otero murders. They know nothing at all. I committed the crimes alone, without anyone's help. There's been no discussion among us. Let's set the record straight. I regret what happened to society, as they are the ones who suffer most. I struggle to control myself. You might call me psychotic with sexual perversion. When this monster enters my mind, I may never understand why, but it remains here. How can one cure himself? If you ask for help after killing 4 people, they will mock you or press the panic button and call the police. I cannot stop. The monster continues to control me. Society should be grateful that there are outlets for someone like me to release this urge during the day. I fantasize about torturing victims, making them mine in a twisted game. I keep track of their numbers, follow them, wait in the dark. Waiting. The pressure is immense, and sometimes I let the game go as I wish, hoping to stop him. But I cannot. He has already chosen his next victims. I do not yet know who they are. The day after I read the paper, I will find out. Too late. Good luck in your hunt. Yours truly, with guilt. P.S. Since sex offenders tend to repeat their methods and cannot change by nature, I will not change mine. My code words are bind them, torture them, kill them. Be okay with that. He added once more that the next victim would be a wholesome letter, and he possessed a detailed account of how he murdered the Otero family. When police arrived with a ladder, investigators debated whether the killer had truly been responsible, as he seemed to know details about the murders that were never made public. For instance, he claimed Joseph Otero's watch had been stolen, yet he also got some facts wrong, such as the pattern and colors of the victim's clothing. At that time, authorities believed the seaman was responsible for Catherine Bright's death, but the killer's letter did not mention Kathy, raising questions. The police attempted to communicate with him through the newspapers, but he remained silent, and after that letter he disappeared from public view. Law enforcement and the media had no idea why he went quiet. They speculated he might have been arrested, moved away, or even died. It was merely a temporary hiatus. On March 17, 1977, 26-year-old Shirley Vane was at home in Wichita with her 3 children, 8-year-old Bud, 6-year-old Stephen, and 4-year-old Stephanie. That afternoon, Stephen knocked on a neighbor's door, and when the neighbor responded, he was told to call the police because Shirley had been found dead. The neighbor entered the Vane residence and discovered Shirley lifeless on her bed, bound with a plastic bag over her head. The medical examiner later concluded she had been strangled with a cord before the bag was placed over her face to finish her off. Although there was some semen found on Shirley's underwear, she had not been sexually assaulted. The police interviewed the children, and Stephen explained that before the attack, he had gone to a nearby store to cash a money order and buy shoes for his mother. He recalled being approached by a man who showed him a photograph of a woman and a boy, asking if he had seen either of them. Stephen told him he hadn't, and then headed home. As he entered, he saw the man knocking on a neighbor's door. Moments later, there was a knock at their own door. Stephen opened it, and the man forced his way inside. Shirley appeared from her bedroom, and the man claimed he was going to tie her up and take some photographs. He attempted to bind the children with electrical tape, but they fought back so he can find them in the bathroom. The bathroom had 2 doors. He tied one end of a rope to a doorknob and the other to a pipe, then placed a bed in front of the second door. He entered Shirley's room, tied her to the bed, and strangled her from behind. The children, who had left the door slightly ajar, screamed at the man to leave their mother alone, warning him that someone was coming soon. During the chaos, the phone rang. After killing Shirley, the man fled the house. Shirley managed to break a pan on the door, creating a gap through which she escaped. She then ran to a neighbor's house for help. Police wondered if the killer, frightened by the possibility of being caught, had fled out of fear. In the quiet hours of December 9th, 1977, a chilling call interrupted the routine of Wichita's emergency services. The caller's voice was distorted and difficult to understand, but the dispatcher managed to record the message: a homicide at a specific address. Despite the poor quality of the transmission, authorities quickly identified the location as a residence on Seth Perishing. When officers arrived, they found Nancy Jo Fox, a 25-year-old woman living in a duplex, dead on her bed. She had been restrained with a cord and strangled with a belt. Her body showed signs of sexual assault. Notably, semen was found on her nightgown, which was near her head since she was not wearing it at the time. The killer had gained entry by prying open a window, likely waiting for Fox to return home after breaking in while she was away. The investigation revealed that the phone line had been cut, and no immediate arrests were made. Police suspected the murderer was the man who had called himself BTK, but they hesitated to release this information publicly, fearing it might incite panic among residents. On January 31st, 1978, an unusual poem was sent to the local newspaper, typed on a small index card. It read, Shirley Locks, will thou be mine? Thou shalt not scream, not yet, feed the lie, lay on a cushion and think of me and Dad, and how it's going to be. Initially, the newspaper's employee thought it was a Valentine's Day joke, but since no payment was made, the poem was discarded. Frustrated, the author later sent the same poem along with another, a drawing, and a letter to a local TV station. The second poem referenced Nancy Fox's murder, describing death as an inevitable, terrifying force. It read, What is that? I can see hands taking hold of me, for death has come, you all can see, hell's open gates to trick me. Oh death, can't you spare me over another year? I'll suffer your jaws until you can't talk, bind your legs so you can't walk, tie your hands so you can't make a stand, and finally close your eyes so you can't see, covering sexual death unto you for me. Accompanying this was a detailed drawing illustrating how he had left Fox's body. The letter beneath expressed disdain for the media's silence, criticizing police leadership for keeping details under wraps. The writer, claiming to be BTK, lamented the lack of publicity for his crimes, which he described as a series of strangulations mostly targeting women. He noted a pattern. Victims were restrained, with little struggle, and often found outside the victim's home, sometimes after a phone call that inadvertently saved others. He confessed to contemplating even more heinous acts, describing how he had planned to kill children by suffocation and hangings, similar to past victims. His words revealed a disturbing obsession with control, sexual violence, and the desire for recognition. The killer's writings and drawings painted a picture of a man driven by a need for notoriety, a pattern of targeting women, and a penchant for bondage and domination. His taunts and detailed descriptions underscored his dangerous, calculating nature, making him one of the most feared serial killers of his time. The infamous serial killer, known as the Hillside Strangler, along with other notorious figures like Ted, often traveled to the West Coast, leaving a trail of senseless murders that seem incomprehensible. Yet, despite their brutality, there appears to be no real remedy, only the grim options of death or capture. Being caught is a nightmare, but I personally remain unaffected. After a killing, I return home and resume my life as if nothing happened. This pattern might repeat, but not constantly, only when the urge strikes again, which is rare and unpredictable. It takes time to plan and execute each murder, and mistakes can be costly, as my fluidity on the phone and handwriting could betray me. My methods are deliberate. I avoid traceable tools like typewriters, preferring to keep my identity hidden. I have composed a short poem about death, which might later be expressed through drawings, photographs, or even recordings. How will you recognize me before I strike? You will receive a copy of the initials BTK. Keep it safe, for the original will surface someday. Perhaps you won't be the unlucky one to identify me. As for a name, I think it's time to choose one. I've already settled on several options, and I like the sound of them. How about the BTK Strangler, a poetic nickname from Australia? Or perhaps the Bondage Strangler, the Psycho, the Wichita Hangman, or the Wichita Executioner? Others include the Garage Phantom or the Asphyxiator. I sign my letters with BTK, and on the next page, I list my intended victims. Victim number 5, for instance, was Shirley Vane, found lying face down on an unmade bed in her northeast bedroom. She was tied with black tape and cords, hands behind her back, ankles bound, legs secured to the bed frame. A small plastic bag covered her head, and she wore a pink nightie, barefoot. She was sick, needing water, and had smoked 1 or 2 cigarettes beforehand. Her house was neat, with toys in the bathroom, and the scene was carefully planned. Victim number 6 was Nancy Fox, also found face down on her bed in the southwest bedroom. She was tied with red pantyhose, her feet bound, dressed in a pink sweater and bra with a necklace. Her house was tidy, with Christmas lights on, and the room was heated to about 90 degrees. The killer used hose and hosiery around the room, and her driver's license was missing. Her clothing was scattered, indicating some premeditation. The next potential victim might be found hanging, with her hands behind her back, bound with black tape or cords, gagged, and possibly with evidence of semen or other bodily fluids. The killer's choice of victim and method is at random, driven by premeditated motives. One thing about the killer's communications is that they often involve cryptic letters, which serve as a chilling signature. In the aftermath of the killer's claims, he asserted that he had murdered 7 people, yet he deliberately refused to identify his 5th victim, leaving authorities clueless about her identity. It was possible that the perpetrator was deliberately playing mind games with the police, adding another layer of mystery to the case. Meanwhile, a local television station sought to reveal a letter related to the killer, despite police objections. Ultimately, they permitted the station to discuss certain parts of the letter during their broadcast. During a press conference, officials publicly acknowledged the existence of a serial murderer operating in the area. They revealed that the killer had branded himself as BTK, an acronym for Bind, Torture, Kill, and advised residents to check their phone lines upon returning home to ensure they hadn't been cut. They also urged people to keep their doors and windows securely locked. In the weeks following this announcement, gun sales in Wichita surged dramatically, and many residents reinforced their homes by nailing shut doors and windows. Sadly, despite the heightened alertness, no arrests were made in connection with the case. On April 28, 1979, Anna Williams, a 63-year-old widow living alone in Wichita, returned to her home only to find signs of a break-in. Attempting to call the police, she discovered her phone line was dead. She then went to her neighbor's house to seek help, and the authorities soon searched her residence. They found remnants of a broom handle, a length of rope, a scarf, and some stolen jewelry. After this intrusion, Anna decided to move to Amber House, where her daughter occasionally collected her mail. About a month and a half later, Anna's daughter retrieved an envelope containing the stolen jewelry, the scarf, and a disturbing drawing of a bound woman. Alongside these items there was a poem titled, "Oh Anna, Why Didn't You Appear?" which read, "It was a perfect plan of deviant pleasure, so bold, that spring night when your passion sparked a new awakening, season worn wet with interference, my pleasure in entanglement, like new vines at night. Oh Anna, why didn't you appear?" The poem continued with vivid imagery of fear, longing, and desperation, describing a world of twisted desire and unfulfilled longing, evoking a sense of haunting obsession. It reflected the killer's twisted psyche and his fascination with the victim's absence. Later, Anna Williams' daughter handed the envelope over to police, but the BTK killer remained silent for a time. Since he had previously gone quiet before, authorities were not entirely convinced that the murders had truly ceased. By April of 1985, it had been over 7.5 years since BTK's last known killing. In that same year, a woman named Maureen Hedge, aged 53, lived alone in Park City, Kansas, about 9 miles north of Wichita. She worked at a hospital cafeteria and was known for her punctuality and dedication. She never missed work. However, her sudden disappearance and the absence of her usual routine raised concern, marking another chapter in the ongoing, chilling saga of the BTK killer. On April 27, 1985, a woman named Hedge vanished under troubling circumstances. Her supervisor grew concerned and contacted her family, who then called the police. When authorities arrived at her home, they discovered her phone line, debit card, and personal belongings, some dating back to the 4th century, scattered throughout her bedroom. Her bed sheets were missing, and her car was nowhere to be found. For reasons unclear, The police classified her case as a missing person investigation rather than a mysterious disappearance. 5 days later, her car was found abandoned, with her bedsheet still inside the trunk. On May 5, 1985, her body was discovered in a ditch. The medical examiner concluded she had been strangled to death. Many believed her murder was linked to the infamous BTK killer, primarily because it occurred over 7 years after his previous crime. Unlike BTK's earlier victims, Hedge had not been kidnapped, nor had her body been moved from her home. And she lived in a different city from the others. She was from Wichita, while her killer's earlier victims resided in nearby Park City. Despite these suspicions, police did not officially connect her murder to BTK, though their investigation persisted under the nickname Ghostbusters. In the summer of 1985, a special task force examined 225 prime suspects through DNA testing, but all were cleared. Frustrated by the lack of progress and the high costs, city officials eventually disbanded the team. Meanwhile, in September 1986, 28-year-old Vicky lived peacefully with her husband Bill and their 2 children, 10-year-old Stephanie and 2-year-old Brandon, in a modest Wichita home. On the morning of the 16th, Vicky was at home with her toddler when Bill drove home around 11 a.m., intending to have lunch. As he approached, he saw a car resembling his wife's, driven by a man. When he arrived, he found his wife's car absent and his young son crying in the living room. Tragically, he also discovered Vicky's body in the bedroom, her neck tightly bound with a cord. Authorities initially did not suspect BTK, believing he was no longer active. Instead, they suspected Bill, but he denied involvement and lacked evidence to support any charges. In January 1991, Dolores Davis, a 62-year-old woman, visited her Wichita home but found her friend missing. She found it odd because they had dinner the night before, and her friend knew she was coming over. Outside her house, Dolores noticed the phone had been disconnected. A glass shard lay shattered on the ground, and the sheets from her friend's bed were missing. She reported her friend missing to police, and 2 weeks later her body was discovered beneath a bridge. The victim's face was grotesquely masked, painted to appear more flesh-like, with bright red lips and glued-on eyelashes. The mask was held in place by a cord fashioned from a Venetian blind. It had been 17 years since the Otero murders, and just over 13 years since BTK's last confirmed killing. Despite the passage of time, the case remained unresolved, and the killer's identity continued to haunt investigators. There is reason to believe that Dolores Davis was a victim of BTK, especially considering that during the period when no one was actively investigating the BTK case, her murder, like those of 10 other victims, went cold. For nearly a decade and a half, the trail remained unresolved, leaving investigators at a dead end. In our next episode, we will delve into the investigation that eventually led to the identification of BTK. Thank you for listening to this episode. Please stay safe and take care of yourself.